This review will be divided into three parts: my experience with Lost Ember and how best to approach the game, a brief description of the game, and an analysis of the story and its characters. The first part I will keep spoiler free, but after that I plan to discuss the story in detail, including the ending of the game and several other important reveals. Proceed at your own discretion. Lost Ember is a rather interesting game with a few parts that I think are odd. Some of those parts are welcome surprises and others are more of a nuisance, sometimes both. Starting with the basics, Lost Ember has the player controlling a wolf, lovingly referred to as, and you won't believe this, Wolf. Wolf is accompanied by an unnamed Spark on a journey to find the City of Light, an afterlife of sorts. Due to some special powers granted at the beginning of the game, Wolf can soul wander, which allows the player to possess other animals and use their associated abilities. Using this power is the main game mechanic, since, depending on the terrain or the challenge ahead, Wolf will need to soul wander to a specific animal to proceed. This leads into the next major facet of gameplay: exploration. The gameplay loop has the player explore a given area to collect memories. Each memory provides a little more insight into the world and the events that took place in the past. A magical wall prevents the player from wandering too far and helps to break each area into chapters. Finding memories will allow the player to break down the magical wall and proceed to the next. This allowed the developers to create a different play space for each area and give some control over what the player sees and when. Another factor that affects pace is the available animals, which are used to throttle the player as they progress. This can be most readily seen in the contrast between possessing a duck and a hummingbird. A duck can only glide, and slowly at that, but a hummingbird is a fast, agile, and small flyer, allowing the player to pretty much roam anywhere in a short span of time. Depending on the available animals, the player may explore slower or faster, and the developer's placement of said animals helps to support this overall pace in the story very well. These two factors together help to create a rather well-curated experience. However, I do have a few gripes. Sometimes the player will get a flying animal to possess and hit an invisible wall, keeping them from returning to previous chapters or exploring too far, which was a little jarring, but not too much of a problem. A more annoying problem is that when falling too far, the player's vision will go dark and their position will reset. The reason why this is annoying is it feels like 2 feet is enough to trigger it, and I think Wolf can handle a bit more than 2 feet. There were multiple times where I would slide off the edge of a path going up, fall a very short distance, sometimes even finishing landing on the ground, and lose control, fade to black, and have my position reset. I will admit, however, that my gripes about invisible walls and falling are rather minor when weighed against the whole experience. As the player progresses through the areas, they will have the chance to find several collectible items. This, I believe, was meant to incentivize the player to explore each area carefully. As this is a handcrafted world, this world is worth the time to closely inspect, but I do have my problems with how this was implemented. The collectibles are divided into 3 categories: memories, artifacts, and mushrooms. The memories are necessary to progress, are clearly telegraphed, and lead the player to the best locations to showcase the world. Artifacts are hidden in the more niche places and are harder to find, but often require some amount of effort to get, and they glow enough to be visible from large distances. The artifacts also tell a story about the world, or at least make a nod to other properties. Artifacts are also often placed in clever locations, having the player solve rudimentary puzzles using the animals available, or exploring the distant reaches of the world. Both kinds of collectibles are great in my book. The memories serve to direct the player and to help curate the experience without being arduous to access, while the artifacts are either cleverly hidden, giving me a quick puzzle to solve, or hidden away in an interesting location, serving the cause of exploring this beautiful world. Mushrooms, on the other hand, I would say, made the experience actively worse for me. Instead of focusing on the world and enjoying it, I was constantly stopping to check bushes, side paths, and backtrack in case I missed something. It forced me to explore, but it sapped much of the enjoyment of moving around the world and observing it, as I began to focus on the places where a mushroom might be hiding and was constantly ramming my camera into rough spots to try and better spot something hidden among the foliage. The general feel of the game is something I would like to address as well. I played this on a controller with rather stiff triggers, and I disliked the fact that I could only hold the trigger to run when in wolf form. I checked the menu for toggles but found none, but the game did offer me the ability to rebind controls, even when on controller, so I changed it to a different key and it worked great. I then noticed the accessibility options, which I found interesting. Most of the settings changed the way animals were controlled, often changing the need to constantly tap a key to a hold. I tried it both ways for a time, but eventually found myself turning everything to hold instead of tap, but I would not discourage others from staying with the original tap settings. The buttons sync up with how an animal acts. For example, the wing beats of a duck are synced with button presses. This gives a nice natural feel for each animal that I appreciated. If one is willing to keep tapping a button, it is worth a shot. While I'm on the topic of settings, I would recommend a setting that makes a significant difference in the experience. When starting a new game, the player is asked to decide to leave on or turn off commentary. Throughout the game, the red spark that follows Wolf around will occasionally chime in and explain story beats, often taking away much of the mystery of the world. I'd recommend, on a first playthrough, turning it off. The cutscenes are still voiced with the spark's commentary off, so the story does not leave anyone wondering what is going on, but it does give the player a little more to think about in between memories. I'd recommend that the game be played without a care in the world, that you ignore the mushrooms, and experience all there is to find. It gives you more to think about as you travel, giving more meaning to each stint in the journey. Not to say that the commentary ruins that, but it certainly makes it easier to process, and the previous events seem to slip from my mind faster when I am told about what happened rather than only watching. The commentary may also be annoying to some, though that is more likely a personal preference. On a second playthrough, if one is so inclined, turn the commentary on to get clarification on things that might have been confusing, or just watch a YouTube video. Overall, the settings are rather impressive. Usually developers skip out on making a game accessible or easy to use. Things like being able to change controller formats are a rarity as far as I have seen. Moon Eye Studios went the extra mile, and even if I think there was room for improvement in a few areas, these settings actually serve to make my experience much more enjoyable, which I very much appreciated. Just like the game, my thoughts on the gameplay itself are a little meandering. From here on out, I plan to discuss story spoilers as I delve into a topic I started thinking about again with the completion of the game. So before I transition into spoiler territory, allow me to heartily recommend this game as a brief but beautiful journey that takes the player on a rather relaxing ride. If you're into exploration or walking simulators, this is an easy recommendation, especially with well-developed settings. Now let's talk about Revolutions in Death. There is one major theme that runs throughout the story: the choice between violence and peace. I do not believe these words alone explain the totality of their meaning and context, so allow me to elaborate. The memories follow a character named Kalani, who is the daughter of a high-ranking warrior named Atevo. Kalani also has a bedridden lover named Wela. The Amranen, the people that the characters are part of, have a few corruption issues. Due to the Emperor taxing more than the people can safely provide, famine and disease has gripped Kalani's home. People are dying in the streets, and Wela is bedridden. Fed up with how the Emperor has little care for his subjects, Kalani resolves to start threatening violent protest against the Emperor. Wela begs Kalani not to commit to the path of violence, claiming that violence will only lead to more violence, and then said Kalani should teach them. Though this is not elaborated on much further, as after a group is gathered in protest of the harsh taxing with the threat of violence, Atevo, being a high-ranking warrior in the Emperor's good graces, responds by burning down the houses of those at the protest. Unfortunately for everyone involved, the fires were set without checking if anyone was inside, as it was assumed everyone was outside of their houses, I guess. As a result, Wela burns to death. Atevo attempts to apologize to Kalani, citing that he didn't know Wela was bedridden inside of her house, but the damage is done. This starts the circle of violence present throughout the story. Kalani builds up a revolution, gathering those hurt by the Emperor, and attacks the capital, destroying an important religious symbol and taking the Emperor hostage. Only then does Kalani realize that the entire capital is on fire from the fighting. Thinking back to Wela, and drawing parallels to her own burning home, Kalani regrets her actions, but her father, outraged at the destruction of both the city that he is supposed to protect and the religious symbol that holds special significance to him, manages to free the Emperor and swears to take his daughter's head next time they meet. Kalani, finding error in her ways, tries to teach her father about the folly of using violence by leading him through the ruins of a previous civilization that fell due to violence as he hunts her for the Emperor. Atevo eventually catches up, having not learned Kalani's lesson, and accidentally kills her. Still not understanding what he has done wrong, but regretting his daughter's death, Atevo mournfully performs a burial for his daughter. It is not understood if he truly grasped what Kalani was trying to teach him in that moment, but her death does give him enough pause to at least think. We do not know when it happened, but after Atevo's death, he remained unburied by his people, his body hidden away in a cave. As a product of remaining unburied and unable to remember his past, Atevo is trapped by the walls that the player breaks down throughout the game. The memories that the player collects give context to Wolf and Atevo as they travel throughout the ruins of Yamron. Since Atevo lacks his memory, and the players have never played the game before, this gives both parties a chance to view the events from an outside perspective. This gives Atevo the perspective he needs to properly reflect on his actions at the very end of their journey. This story about the effects of violence is what reminded me of a question, one which I wanted to think about more formally. The question I want to put forward is this: is a violent revolution ever a good thing? I think that depends on where the value is placed. One option is a rather easy approach. The central value is the value of life itself. The fastest and easiest way I can think of to support this value is to recognize our inability to replace life once taken. If we do make life the central value, we run into a few problems. By valuing life, it seems that we have to choose the option that saves the most lives, or leads to the largest number of best lives, essentially a utilitarian approach. If we do that, however, we run into the problem of not being able to accurately predict the outcome of a revolution. If the revolution takes place, it may cost less lives in the short term, but it could lead to underlying problems since the revolution took place through violent means, costing more lives in the long run as others follow the example of violence being used to solve a problem. Though this may never come to pass, we simply lack the ability to predict that. If, in contrast, we are to assert that we can save the most lives by teaching the oppressors, it is not guaranteed that the oppressors will ever learn, which could simply lead to the death of many people in the futile attempt to peacefully solve the problem. I can provide other examples, but I think that this is enough to see that the answer could not be found by a simple appeal to the consequences. Consequentialism has many problems, with the first of many being the difficulty of prediction. The universe itself is a closed system. Every action has a reaction, and even the simplest action can have universe-spanning effects as cause and effect expand throughout time. We make jokes about how moving one chair may completely change the future, but despite the hilarity of moving a chair to, say, make flying cars powered by hamster wheels a reality, the effects of our actions, even the minor ones, truly do have far-reaching consequences. This is why consequentialism is flawed. We cannot properly predict the fallout of any action we take. We might know the immediate consequences, but even weighing just those might not work out, as other actions might interfere with our knowledge. Another example that targets a weakness of consequentialism is that of a terrorist who has taken someone hostage and is asking for money. You can save the captive by paying the terrorist, but the terrorist will now be incentivized to take more prisoners and is able to fund even more terrorism. The utilitarian consequentialist would weigh the worth of the person versus the possibility of future terrorist activity, but that quickly spirals out of control as the attempt to weigh the value of an individual is difficult in the face of an undeterminable outcome. The terrorist could simply refuse to give the person back after receiving payment, or execute them, or maybe they will stop all their activities and become a peaceful member of society. The only time this problem can be avoided is with an omnipotent being, as measuring the effects of an action through all of time to determine all the consequences is simply impossible for humans. This is why we cannot answer the terrorist question based solely on the consequences of our actions, while trying to maximize the value of life. This problem with consequentialism makes it much more difficult to place a value on anything. If we value societal good, how do we know we are making the right difference? You can't place value on the people close to you and your personal life since we cannot be sure their lives will be improved by our actions without knowing all the effects, which we can't, as I mentioned previously. If you value minimizing harm, then how will you accurately predict what will lead to the least harm? When focusing on the consequences of one's actions, and how it affects what we value, it simply becomes impossible to know what decisions will lead to the best consequences. Given these problems, I suggest a shift in focus. Instead of looking at the consequences of our actions, perhaps we should try another approach. If we expect that we can only be responsible for our own actions, then maybe the focus should be on doing your best to do the right thing and leaving the consequences to the divine or fate, whatever floats your boat. Determining the right actions apart from its consequences is a hard ask, but by bypassing the consequences, it helps to clear up, if only a little, a very muddy situation. This takes the value away from life and places it on the actions one takes as an agent in the world. If your actions lead to your own death and many others while trying to teach or fight the oppressors, then so be it, so long as it was your best attempt to do the right thing, in which case the action can at least be understood or excused. Determining what is right is a much larger problem than I am capable of tackling in a short essay. Many books have been written on this topic, and most good ones concede that we have yet to solve the issue. But I think that focusing on the right action is at least a hopeful approach to the problem. In the end, I think all three characters may have been in the right. Wayla tried to do what was right and sought it through teaching. Kalani sought the same through violence, but was unable to understand the gravity of taking a life until it was already too late. Atevo, unable to learn until the very end, did what he thought was best, following his loyalty to the Emperor, only stopping to doubt himself after the death of his daughter. All three of them were trying to do the right thing. The death and destruction that resulted as a consequence only served to highlight the tragedy of the whole situation. Each character was limited by the experiences in their life and their perception, and each acted to the best of their abilities given those perceptions. The most we can do is our best, and hope that the consequences will be kind, as doing the right thing does not mean that the action will be rewarded or the consequence is good, just that someone tried their best. With the numerous problems present in the world and the seemingly endless supply of terrible things in the news, this conclusion does bring me some modicum of comfort, as I can simply focus on doing my best to do what is right.